"Hey, waitress," the billionaire says with a lazy smile swirling his wine. "Tell me something. Should I buy the company or destroy it?" The two executives beside him laugh. They expect a joke. They expect silence. Instead, the waitress slowly sets the water pitcher on the table. Her eyes lock on his. "If you trigger the debt covenants," she says quietly, "Dr. Thorne will file the injunction within hours." The laughter dies. The pen in the billionaire's hand stops clicking, because only 4 people in the world know about that lawsuit, and none of them are supposed to be carrying a tray in a restaurant. The restaurant Aurelia was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu, only suggestions. It existed on the 81st floor of a glass and steel spike in downtown Manhattan, a cathedral of wealth where the apostles were men like Arthur Montgomery. Arthur, founder and CEO of Montgomery Capital Partners, MCP, was bored. He leaned back in his chair, the plush velvet costing more than the monthly rent of the woman currently filling his water glass. Across from him sat Charles Vance and Brody Hayes, 2 junior VPs whose immaculate suits and eager dog-like expressions marked them as professional sycophants. "The due diligence is poetic," Brody was saying, swirling a Cabernet. "Helios Dynamics is a carcass, Arthur. A beautiful patentary carcass. We go in Monday, trigger the debt covenants, and we'll have their IP portfolio for pennies. Thorne's research alone is worth the acquisition price," Charles added. "Even if we dissolve the rest." Arthur merely nodded, tapping a gold pen against the rim of his glass. Click, click, click. The sound was the only thing that held his attention. He'd done this 100 times. Find a struggling innovator, leverage their debt, strip the assets, and sell the husk. It was clean, it was profitable, it was dull. The waitress Elena Sanchez approached their table. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long hours and aching feet. She was invisible to them, a functional part of the room like the air conditioning or the dim lighting. "Will there be anything else, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice flat. "Professional." Arthur looked up. He hadn't really looked at her before. She was young, maybe late 20s, with intelligent, tired eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun. There were no traces of a smile. A cruel, bored impulse sparked in his chest. "Actually, yes," Arthur said, a slow, condescending smile spreading across his face. Charles and Brody paused, recognizing their bosses. "Let's play with the little people." "Mood, we're having a disagreement," Arthur lied, leaning forward conspiratorially. "My friends here are nervous. I'm about to make a very large purchase. A, shall we say, significant financial decision." He gestured around the opulent room. "You see a lot of people in here. You must overhear things. What's your advice? Should I do it?" Charles snorted into his napkin. Brody just grinned, waiting for the punchline. Elena stood perfectly still. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't blush or stutter. She simply held the silver tray at her side and looked directly at Arthur Montgomery. Her gaze was not differential. It was analytical. "That," she said, her voice clear and low, "would depend on your risk tolerance." The smile on Arthur's face faltered. It wasn't the answer he expected. "Oh," he said, intrigued. "Go on." "It would depend," she continued, "if you're acquiring for long-term growth or for a short-term liquidation. And if you have a contingency plan for a major IP injunction." The click, click, click of the pen stopped. Charles and Brody were no longer smiling. Arthur's blood ran cold. He stared at her. "What did you say?" Elena didn't blink. She set the water pitcher down on her tray, the clink of glass on silver echoing in the sudden silence at their table. "I asked if you'd priced in the lawsuit from Dr. Aris Thorne," she said. Arthur Montgomery went pale. He hadn't just been noticed by the waitress. He had been seen. She leaned in just slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the restaurant's ambient hum. "Are you talking," she asked, "about Helios Dynamics?" Arthur Montgomery, the man who moved markets with a single word, was utterly and completely speechless. The air at the table solidified. Charles and Brody looked at Arthur, their faces frozen in a panic. This wasn't just a leak. This was an existential threat. The Helios deal was private, known only to their inner circle, and the highest echelons of the target company. Arthur, a master of control, recovered first. His shock morphed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. "Charles Brody," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Get the car and find out who she is now." His VPs scrambled from their chairs, nearly knocking one over. "Arthur, we now." They fled, leaving Arthur alone at the table with the waitress. Elena, for her part, looked resigned. She turned to walk away, her shift clearly over in more ways than one. "Stop," Arthur commanded. He stood up, dropping a black Centurion card on the table. "You're not going anywhere." "You're making a scene," Elena said quietly, not turning around. "And you're done with your meal." "Who are you?" he demanded, ignoring her. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Who do you work for, Bain KKR? Did Martin Wexler at Sterling Price send you?" Elena finally turned to face him fully. The weariness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a spark of defiance. "I work for Aurelia. I put on an apron. I carry plates. And I listened to men like you brag too loudly about their due diligence." Arthur was staggered. You overheard us. You weren't exactly subtle." She shot back. "You broadcasted your strategy. Patentrish carcass trigger the debt covenants. Thorne's research. You might as well have taken out an ad in the Wall Street Journal. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. The only thing you didn't say was the name. I just happened to know it." Arthur's mind was racing. How do you know about Thorne? His injunction. This was the part that chilled him. The injunction was a ghost, a rumor his team had supposedly handled and buried weeks ago. Elena gave a bitter laugh. "You think you're the only one who knows Aris Thorne? He's a brilliant paranoid man who's been screwed over by investors his entire life. He's not the type to let his life's work get stripped for parts by a vulture fund like MCP. Vulture fund," Arthur repeated the insult landing with a thud. "That's what you are, isn't it?" She said, "You're not investing, you're butchering, and you're walking into a trap." "Explain," he demanded. "You think you're buying Helios's hydrogen fuel cell patents? You're not. You're buying a shell. Thorne's core, IP, the catalytic converter design that makes the whole thing viable, was developed before he founded Helios. He filed it under a private trust. The patents Helios holds are dependent on that prior art. The moment you trigger the covenants and try to seize the assets, he files the injunction. He'll argue fraudulent conveyance, and he'll win." She adjusted the tray in her hand. "Your multi-billion-dollar acquisition. It's worthless. You're buying a lawsuit, Mr. Montgomery. A very public, very expensive lawsuit that will gut your entire green energy fund." Arthur stared at her, the implications crashing down on him. She wasn't just guessing. She was citing legal strategy. She knew about the prior art. His team, Charles and Brody, had assured him the IP was clean. They had lied. Or worse, they were idiots. "How?" he said again, his voice now quiet, stripped of its arrogance. "How do you know this Elena Sanchez? That's what it says on your name tag." "Who are you, Elena Sanchez?" Elena looked at the name tag as if she'd forgotten it was there. "I'm the person who told Dr. Thorne to set up that private trust." She said, "I used to be his analyst at Sterling Price before Martin Wexler had me blacklisted and my FINRA licenses revoked." She stepped around him. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to clock out. You can settle the bill at the front." Arthur stood frozen, the black credit card sitting uselessly on the table. He hadn't just been warned, he had been educated. He watched her walk through the dining room, past the linen-draped tables and the oblivious diners, and disappear through the service door. He had come to the restaurant a king. He was leaving it a fool. Arthur Montgomery did not sleep. He spent the night in his penthouse office, a glass-walled room that overlooked a silent, sleeping New York. The only sound was the hum of his servers. By 2:00 a.m., he was on a secure video call with Cynthia Marks. Cynthia was the opposite of Charles and Brody. She didn't work at MCP. She worked for Arthur personally. She was his head of research, and more accurately, his private intelligence service. She wore a simple grey t-shirt, her face pale in the glow of her monitors. She had been digging for 3 hours. Elena Sanchez. Cynthia said, her voice crisp. It's a story. Give it to me. Arthur said, pacing. Born in Queens, full ride to Stanford straight into their MBA program, graduated top 2% recruited by every bulge bracket bank on the street. She chose Sterling Price assigned to their special situations desk under Martin Wexler. Wexler Arthur spat his biggest rival, a man known for his charm and his utter lack of ethics. For 3 years she was his star. Cynthia continued pulling up files. Her analysis was legendary. She saw the 2023 commodities crash 6 months out. She flagged 3 separate unicorn startups as frauds before they imploded. She was the firm's golden girl, and Arist Thorne was her passion project. She found him, believed in his tech, and convinced Sterling Price to lead his Series A funding. So what happened? Arthur asked. Martin Wexler. Cynthia said simply. Wexler ran a shadow pump and dump scheme using a shell corporation in the Caymans. He'd get his analysts like Elena to write bullish public research on a stock while he was simultaneously shorting it through the shell. It was brilliant. It was also highly illegal. And Elena found out. She didn't just find out, she built a case. Cynthia said she found the offshore entity, the transaction logs. She compiled a 90-page report and, following protocol, submitted it to Sterling Price's internal compliance department. Arthur closed his eyes. He knew this part of the game. The head of compliance, Cynthia said, was Wexler's old roommate from Wharton. The report vanished. 2 days later, an anonymous tip was sent to the SEC flagging Elena Sanchez for insider trading. He framed her perfectly. Wexler used her own research on Arist Thorne as the pretext. He claimed she was the one manipulating the stock using her access to his tech to front her run the market. He manufactured evidence-fake emails. He had her junior analyst, a kid she'd mentored, testify against her in exchange for a promotion. The SEC launched a formal investigation. Sterling Price fired her for cause. The investigation stalled, but the damage was done. Finn suspended her Series 7 and 63. She was blacklisted, unhirable. Arthur felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just a corporate rivalry. It was an execution. And the debts he asked her mother, stage 4 cancer. The legal fees from fighting the SEC investigation wiped out her savings. The medical bills did the rest. She's been working 2 jobs, waitressing at Aurelia and data entry for a logistics firm for 18 months. The mother passed away 3 weeks ago. Arthur sank into his chair. The tired, intelligent eyes, the flat professional voice, it all made a terrible, sickening sense. And Thorne, he asked, his voice thick, still believes in her. He knew she was framed. He's the one who told her to hide his IP long before MCP ever got involved. He trusts her. Arthur, not the banks. Cynthia paused. There's one more thing. Charles and Brodie, the due diligence on the Helios acquisition. They ran it, and they were the ones who recommended triggering the debt covenants. They also filed a report 4 weeks ago stating that the rumours of an IP injunction by Dr. Thorne were unfounded and meritless. They spoke to a consultant who assured them the IP was clean. Who was the consultant, Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. Cynthia's face was grim. A private strategist paid through a third-party firm. Took me an hour to trace the payments. It was Martin Wexler. The betrayal was total. Wexler wasn't just a rival. He was a puppet master. He had framed Ella Lanina. He had used Arthur's own team, his own arrogant, lazy, greedy VPs to feed him a poisoned deal. Charles and Brodie either took a bribe from Wexler to bury the truth, or they were so monumentally stupid that they paid him for the bad information. Either way, they were finished. Arthur Montgomery, the apex predator, had been led into a snare by his rival, and the only person who had warned him was the woman Wexler had already destroyed. He looked at the digital file Cynthia had sent. It was Elena's original 90-page report on Wexler's fraud. The report that had cost her everything. Cynthia, he said, his voice like granite. Get me my legal team, the real one, and get me everything. I mean everything on Martin Wexler's offshore holdings. I want to know where he breathes." He hung up the call and stared out at the rising sun. He wasn't just going to fix this. He was going to war. The next day, Aurelia was closed for a private event. The event was Arthur Montgomery sitting alone at the same table. Table 31. He had bought out the restaurant for the entire afternoon. Elena arrived for her shift at 3 hours p.m., dressed in her black and white uniform. She saw the empty dining room, the closed sign on the door, and Arthur sitting in the gloom. Her first instinct was to turn and run. She'd been expecting this. A summons, a threat, a non-disclosure agreement shoved in her face with a severance check from the restaurant. The restaurant manager, a nervous man named Francis, met her at the door. "Miss Sanchez, Mr. Montgomery is here to see you. He has reserved the restaurant." I see that Elena set her heart pounding. She clutched the strap of her bag. "He just wants to talk, Elena. Please." She took a deep breath. She had faced down Martin Wexler. She had buried her mother. She would not be intimidated by this man. She walked across the empty, silent floor, her footsteps echoing, and stood before his table. "You're costing yourself about $40,000 an hour to do this," she said, her voice betraying no fear. "My time isn't that valuable." Arthur looked up. He didn't look like the arrogant titan from the night before. He looked like she felt exhausted. "Sit down, Miss Sanchez," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "I'd rather stand. Please." The word was not a command. It was a request. Wearily, she sat. Arthur pushed a thick, bound document across the table. It was her old report, the 90-page file on Wexler's fraud. "I've read this," he said 3 times. "It's the most brilliant piece of forensic analysis I've ever seen." Elena stared at the report. Seeing it again was like touching a fresh wound. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter," Arthur said. "What matters is that it's true, every word. And what he did to you was a crime." Elena's hands clenched in her lap. It was just business. That's what you people call it, right? You were about to do the same thing to Eris Thorne. The accusation hit him hard because it was true. "You're right," he said quietly. I was bored. I was lazy. I trusted the wrong people. I let men like Charles and Brodie men who only care about the bonus guide the ship. I let Martin Wexler, a man I despise, nearly lead me off a cliff." He leaned forward. "Charles Vance and Brodie Hayes are no longer employed by Montgomery Capital. As of this morning, their professional lives are over." Elena's expression didn't change. "Good for you. That doesn't fix my life or Oris's." "No," Arthur agreed. "It doesn't. But this might." He slid a second folder across the table. This one was a slim, elegant employment contract. "What's this?" "It's a job offer. Head of a new division at MCP. Special Situations and Risk Analysis. Your own team, your own mandate. You report directly to me. Your first assignment," he said, tapping the folder, "is to fix the Helios Dynamics deal. Your second is to help me destroy Martin Wexler." He named a salary. It was a number so large it sounded fictional. It was a number that would have paid for her mother's treatments 10 times over. Elena looked at the contract. She looked at Arthur, and she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and full of pain. "You think you can buy me," she said, pushing the folder back. "You think you can wave a check, and I'll just forget who you are. You're not different from Wexler Montgomery. You're just richer. You are fine with stripping Helios, fine with destroying Eris Thorne until you found out it would cost you money." She stood up her chair, scraping loudly on the hardwood. "You don't want an analyst. You want the person who knows where the bodies are buried. You want insurance. I am not for sale. Elena, no. You sit in your tower and you play with lives. You break people. You broke me. Or Wexler did. And you stood by ready to pick the bones. Find someone else to clean up your mess." She turned and walked away from the table, from the contract, from the money. Arthur sat in the empty $40,000 an hour restaurant, utterly alone. He had made his offer, and he had been rejected. He watched her go, and for the first time in his professional life, he realized he had encountered something he couldn't acquire. Integrity. He had offered her a job. He realized with a dawning terrible clarity that he should have been asking for help. He hadn't just insulted her. He had profoundly misunderstood her. To win her, he couldn't just offer her a new life. He had to prove he was worthy of her intellect. And that meant he had to change the entire game. Arthur didn't go back to his office. He went to the MCP hangar at Teterboro Airport. "Get the Gulfstream," he told his pilot. "We're going to Austin, Texas." While in the air, he made 2 calls. The first was to his board of directors. It was a brutal, short conversation. "The Helios deal as structured is dead," he announced. "Vance and Hayes are out effective immediately. They are being investigated for gross negligence and conspiracy to defraud the firm. Their bonuses are clawed back. Their unvested stock is forfeit. No, I will not be taking questions." The second call was to a very confused, very suspicious Dr. Aris Thorne. "Dr. Thorne, my name is Arthur Montgomery. You don't know me, but you know my firm." "Yes, that one." "I am on my way to your lab." "No, not with lawyers. Alone. Because Elena Sanchez told me I was a fool. And she was right." 3 hours later, Arthur was standing in a cluttered warehouse-like lab in an Austin suburb. The air smelled of ozone and solder. Aris Thorne, a man with a wild grey beard, frantic eyes and coffee stains on his polo shirt, stood with his arms crossed, blocking the entrance to his workshop. "You've got 5 minutes," Thorne said. "Then I'm calling the police. Elena said you were a shark." "I don't swim with sharks. I'm not here to strip your company." "A's," Arthur said, hands raised. "I'm here to save it." "Save it?" Thorne laughed. "You triggered the covenants. My debt is due in 72 hours. You are the shark." "That was my team," Arthur said. "My old team. They were working with Wexler." Thorne's eyes narrowed at the name. Wexler. He fed them bad intelligence to get me to buy a worthless shell. He used them. He used me. And he used you. What he didn't count on, Arthur said, was Elena. She told me everything. The prior art, the private trust, the injunction. She's the only reason I'm here and not in a courtroom. Thorne visibly softened. Just a fraction. She's okay. She's remarkable. And she's right. Your tech errors show it to me. Not the patents, not the balance sheet. Show me what you're really building. Suspicious but intrigued. Thorne hesitated, then grunted, "Fine, but if you touch anything, I'll tase you." For the next 4 hours, Arthur Montgomery, the man who dealt in abstractions of wealth, got his hands dirty. Thorne showed him the prototype. It wasn't a theoretical patent. It was a working hydrogen on-demand fuel cell the size of a shoebox, capable of powering an entire house. It was clean, stable, and cheap. Arthur stared at it, his mind for the first time in years, truly wearing. This isn't just an asset, Eris. This is the future. Why was Helios failing? This should be worth $1 trillion. "Because I'm a scientist, not a salesman," Thorne yelled, throwing his hands up. "Wexler and Sterling Price loaded me with debt, gave me terrible terms, and my board was full of his cronies. They wanted me to fail so they could sell the patents. They never wanted me to build it." Arthur finally understood. He hadn't been buying a carcass. He had been tricked into killing a golden goose. He pulled out his phone. "Cynthia, I'm wiring $200 million from my personal funds to a new holding. I want you to buy all of Helios Dynamics' outstanding senior debt. All of it. Pay a premium. I want it done by morning." Sir Cynthia's voice crackled. "Then contact the board of Helios. Tell them Montgomery Capital is making a new offer. We're not acquiring them. We are refinancing them. We're clearing their debt, taking a majority equity stake, and we are installing a new CEO." Arthur looked at Aris Thorne, who was staring at him stunned. "Dr. Aris Thorne, and we are funding his research and development effective immediately." Arthur hung up and looked at the scientist. "The deal is this, Aris. You stop being a paranoid scientist and you start being a CEO. I'll handle the money. I'll handle the board. I'll handle Martin Wexler. You just changed the world. Thorne was speechless. I have one condition, Arthur said. Anything. Elena Sanchez. She's not going to work for me. She's going to work for us. I want her on the new board of directors as our ethics and strategy chair. She's the only one of us who has both. Thorne broke into a slow, spreading grin. I can agree to that. Arthur flew back to New York. As the sun was setting, he had just pivoted his entire investment strategy. He hadn't just saved a few billion. He had made 100 billion. And he had done it by finally listening. Now, for the hard part. Arthur didn't call Elena. He didn't summon her. He went to her apartment in Queens, a third floor, or walk up over a bakery. He waited on the stoop at 7 to 1 a.m., holding 2 cups of coffee. When she came out dressed for her data entry job, she stopped dead on the top step. "You're stalking me," she said, her voice flat. "I'm apologizing," he said, standing up. He held out one of the coffees. "And I'm recruiting again. I gave you my answer, Mr. Montgomery. I'm not for sale." "I know. That's why this isn't a job offer." He took a breath. As of 6 a.m. this morning, Montgomery Capital Partners is the majority equity holder in Helios Dynamics. We have cleared their debt. I have fired the board. I have installed Dr. Eris Thorne as CEO. Elena froze her hand on the railing. "What? He's a terrible businessman," Arthur continued. "But he's a genius. He just needed a partner, not a predator. You were right about him. You were right about everything." He held out the coffee again. "He's requested you personally. I'm requesting you. He wants you on his board as strategy chair. I want you. I need you, Elena. Not as an employee, as a partner. I want you to run the new MCP Green Energy Fund. Not as an analyst, as the general partner. You find the next Eris Thorne. You protect them. You fund them. You have full autonomy." Elena stared at him, searching his face for the lie. The angle. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why do this?" "Because you were right," he said, the admission costing him his entire ego. "I was just like Wexler, and I didn't like what I saw. You showed me a better way to win. It's not about stripping assets. It's about finding value no one else can see. You see things, Elena. I just see the numbers." She finally took the coffee. Her hands were shaking. "What about Wexler?" she asked, her voice hard. Arthur's face darkened. "That's the other half of the partnership. Revenge." He handed her his phone. On the screen was a live feed of an SEC raid. They were swarming the lobby of Sterling Price. "Your 90-page report," Arthur said, "was very thorough, but it was missing the final transaction logs from his Cayman shell. I acquired those last night. I also acquired the sworn testimony of the junior analyst he promoted for lying about you. Turns out his conscience was heavy and my checkbook was persuasive. I sent the full package to the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York 4 hours ago." Elena watched transfixed as a grim-faced Martin Wexler, his designer suit rumpled, was led out of the building in handcuffs. "He's finished." Arthur said, "His assets are frozen. He's going to prison, and FINRA will be reopening your case. With my testimony and the new evidence, your licenses will be restored by the end of the month." Elena slowly sank onto the steps, the coffee cup in her lap. She had fought for so long, been in the dark for so long, and now in a single morning, the sun had risen. She looked up at Arthur, tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a terrible, crushing relief. You don't have to say anything," Arthur said gently. "But I have a board meeting at 10 Narrows a.m. to introduce the new general partner. And you're late?" He offered his hand. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she took it. "One condition," she said, her voice gaining strength as she stood. "Name it. You will never, ever ask me for advice as a joke again." A small, genuine smile touched Arthur Montgomery's lips. "I may never make a decision without your advice again. Deal." The year that followed was not a victory lap. It was a war fought on 3 fronts. The first was the war for Helios Dynamics. The second was the war against Martin Wexler. And the third, the most quiet and most difficult, was the war inside Montgomery Capital Partners itself. The war between Arthur's past and Elena's future. Elena Sanchez's new office was on the 81st floor, one level above Aurelia, the restaurant where her old life had ended. Her office was glass and steel, with a view that spanned from the Statue of Liberty to the new towers rising at the World Trade Center. It was beautiful, and it was a prison. For the first 90 days, she wasn't a partner. She was a pariah. Arthur had made the announcement with his typical brutal efficiency. Elena Sanchez is our new general partner, running the Green Futures Fund. Her first project is Helios. Her mandate is absolute. Her decisions are mine. Do not get in her way. He had intended this as a shield. But the old guard at MCP, all men who had been Charles Vance and Brodie Hayes's peers, saw it as blood in the water. They were sharks, and they did not tolerate new species. The leader of the old guard was a man named Markham, a managing director from the M&A division whose face looked like a clenched fist. He had made his fortune in hostile takeovers of manufacturing plants in the 90s. He saw Elena as a diversity hire, a pet project, a waitress, as the Whispers called her. He cornered her at the third quarter planning meeting. The boardroom was a long polished slab of obsidian with 30 of MCP's most powerful executives. Arthur sat at the head, silent, watching. Miss Sanchez Markham began, his voice a growly baritone that feigned respect. Your 9F figure projection for the Helios H1 cell. It's ambitious. It relies on a manufacturing ramp-up that, frankly, my team finds laughable. He clicked a slide. A complex chart appeared. This is your cash burn rate. You're lighting $20 million a month on fire in Austin for R&D. This firm, he tapped the table, doesn't do R&D, it does ROI. I am proposing we table the H1 project, focus on the 32 existing patents, the ones we can actually sell, and liquidate the R&D division. We can have Helios in the black in 6 weeks and spin it off for a clean 20% profit by Christmas. He was proposing in polite corporate terms to do exactly what Arthur had originally planned to butcher Eris Thorne and sell the pieces. Every eye turned to Elena. She was, as always, the most plainly dressed person in the room in a simple grey sheath dress. She hadn't said a word. She stood up. She didn't look at her laptop. She didn't look at her notes. She looked at Markham. Mr. Markham, she said, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the heavy tension. Thank you for that analysis. You'll forgive me. I'm new here. I'm just a waitress after all, so I have to do extra homework. She walked to the smartboard. I was curious about your definition of ROI, so I ran your last 3 acquisitions. She tapped the board. Markham's smug expression faltered. His own deals flashed on the screen. Acquisition Alpha, you bought a logging company in Oregon. You streamlined it by firing 800 workers and selling the timber rights. You made a 22% profit. That's right, Markham said, puffing his chest. You also triggered an environmental lawsuit that is now in its 2nd year with a potential liability of $400 million, which you conveniently listed as a long-term risk in a footnote. You also sold the timber rights at the bottom of the market, missing the 40% upswing that came 3 months later because you were too focused on a quick sale. My fund, she said, her voice like ice, bought those same timber futures. We made 60%. Markham's face went white. Acquisition Beta, she continued, a textile company. You sold their looms for scrap. You didn't, however, check the patents on those looms. They were a proprietary weave technology. The company that bought them for scrap just signed a $900 million contract with the Department of Defense for new body armor. She turned to the room. Mr. Markham is right. My cash burn rate is high, but I am burning cash to build the most important piece of technology in the 21st century. He is burning cash because he's a lazy analyst. He's an arsonist who thinks he's a firefighter because he only knows how to count the ashes. She turned back to Markham. You're not a vulture, Mr. Markham. You're just a scavenger. You're not looking for value. You're looking for scraps. The Helios H1 isn't a patent. It's a revolution. And you're proposing we sell the blueprints to the revolution for a 20% profit. She walked back to her seat. Your analysis is not laughable. It's negligent. If you ever speak on my projects again, I will not do it in this room. I'll do it in a formal letter to the board recommending your immediate dismissal for gross incompetence." She sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a $100 million explosion. Arthur Montgomery, who had not moved a muscle, finally steepled his fingers. "Well, Markham," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Do you have a response, Markham?" A man who had terrified rivals for 30 years just opened and closed his mouth. He was finished. "I thought not," Arthur said. "The Helios budget is approved. As Ms. Sanchez said, her mandate is absolute. The rest of you find a new topic or a new job." Elena had walked into the room a target. She walked out a predator. The war for Helios was a battle of numbers. The war against Wexler was a battle of ghosts. 6 months after her hiring, Elena was called to a deposition. Wexler's legal team, paid for by the last dregs of his offshore accounts, was formidable. They were not trying to prove him innocent. They were trying to annihilate the credibility of every witness against him. Elena was the star witness, and they were ready for her. The deposition room was small, hot, and smelled like stale coffee. Elena sat at one side of a long table. At the other sat Clarissa Sharp Wexler's lead counsel, a woman with a smile like a stapler. For 3 hours, Sharp didn't ask about the fraud. She asked about Elena's mother. "Miss Sanchez, these are your bank records from 2024. Can you confirm you had $112 in your checking account on March 1st objection?" The assistant U.S. attorney said, "Revance. It's highly relevant counsel Sharp cooped. It goes to motive and desperation. Weren't you, Miss Sanchez, drowning in medical debt?" "My mother was ill," Elena said, her hands clenched under the table. "So ill that you were willing to do anything to pay those bills. Perhaps sell a few company secrets. And when that didn't work, perhaps you tried to blackmail your boss, Mr. Wexler." "That's a lie," Elena said, her voice shaking. "Is it? Or is it true that you compiled a report after he refused to promote you? That you were a disgruntled employee, and you've been spinning this fantasy ever since?" "I was not refused a promotion." "You were desperate." Sharp cut in her voice, now a whip. "You were desperate, you were broke, and you were angry." Then, like a miracle, Arthur Montgomery appears, the richest man in New York, and he just gives you a job or partnership. What a coincidence. Tell me, Mrs. Sanchez, what exactly did you have to do for Mr. Montgomery to earn such generosity? The insinuation hung in the air, vile and suffocating. Elena felt the old panic rising, the same suffocating helplessness she'd felt when she was first fired. She was the waitress again, small, invisible, and accused. "That's enough," the AUSA said. "I'll rephrase," Sharp said. "Isn't it true that Arthur Montgomery hates Martin Wexler? That they are bitter rivals, and that he paid you with this new job to deliver him? This report to fabricate this testimony so he could destroy his rival? This was the attack. She wasn't just a disgruntled employee. She was a paid assassin, a tool for Montgomery's corporate war." Elena's mouth was dry. She looked at the AUSA, who looked worried. She was losing. And then the door at the back of the room opened. Arthur Montgomery walked in. He didn't say a word. He didn't look at Sharp. He just walked to the back row and sat down, crossing his legs as if he were waiting for a show to start. His presence filled the tiny hot room with a sudden chilling pressure. Sharp's rhythm broke. She visibly faltered. "Mr. Montgomery, this is a private deposition." "I was invited," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble, "by the U.S. Attorney's Office as an interested party." "Please continue, counsel." "You were just getting to the paid testimony part. I'm fascinated." Elena looked at him. He met her gaze. He didn't offer a smile. He didn't nod. He just was a mountain. And he was on her side. Something inside her. The part that had been bent and broken suddenly snapped back into place. The fear vanished, replaced by a cold, surgical fury. She turned back to Clarissa Sharp. "You're right, counsel," Elena said. The entire room froze. Sharp looked at her confused. "I was desperate." Elena continued, her voice now as steady as a heartbeat. I was desperate to save my mother. I was desperate to pay my bills. I was desperate to find a single person who would listen to the truth. And you're right, Mr. Wexler's team and the SEC and the entire world did a very good job of making me look like a hysterical, vengeful woman. That's the defense you're using, isn't it? The hysterical woman defense? It's a classic, and it's pathetic. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with Sharp's. But you've made a fatal mistake. You're attacking my motive. You should be attacking my data. But you can't because the data is perfect. You're not asking me about the offshore wire transfers from Stellaron Holdings in the Caymans. You're not asking me about the IP masked transaction logs I found on Wexler's private server. You're not asking me about the 42 separate illegal short trades he executed personally, 3 of which I witnessed him order. She picked up a copy of the bank records. You want to talk about my $112? Let's talk about your client's $80 million in undocumented income, which he routed through 3 shell companies to avoid taxes. I have the account numbers. Would you like them? Or should I just give them to the IRS, who I'm meeting with next Tuesday? Sharp was an icy shade of pale. Mr. Montgomery didn't pay me to fabricate testimony. Elena concluded, her voice ringing with power. He hired me because I am the only person on this planet who was smart enough to catch Martin Wexler. And I am the only one who has the proof. He hired me because I am the best. You're trying to discredit a witness, counsel. But you're not in a room with a witness. You're in a room with an expert. The deposition was over. Clarissa Sharp was already packing her briefcase. Arthur was waiting in the hallway. You didn't have to come, Elena said, her adrenaline finally ebbing. You're right. I didn't, Arthur said. I'm not used to partnerships. I'm still learning. But I believe partners show up. He held out his hand. Not for a shake, just an offer. Come on, let's go ruin someone else's day. I think Markham needs a new performance review. Elena looked at his hand. This time, she didn't just take it. She smiled. He's not worth the time. We have a prototype to build. The final war was the war for Eris Thorne. The scientist was a genius, but as a CEO, he was a disaster. He was, as Elena had diagnosed, paranoid. He trusted no one. He missed deadlines, changed designs on whims, and treated the $200 million budget Arthur had given him like a personal expense account. 9 months and the crisis hit. The H1 prototype failed. It didn't just fail, it shorted out, causing a small fire and setting the project back by months. Arthur was on his jet to Austin in an hour. He was livid. That's it. He's out. We're putting one of my ops guys in charge. He's a scientist. He'll be head of R&D, but he's done as a CEO. He landed in Austin and stormed into the lab, a massive warehouse that now looked like a high-tech junkyard. He found Elena, but she wasn't in a suit. She was wearing greasy jeans, a black hoodie with the Helios logo on it, and steel-toed boots. Her hair was in a messy bun, and there was a streak of soot on her cheek. She was holding a soldering iron. "Where is he?" Arthur demanded. In the quiet room, Elena said, not looking up from the circuit board she was working on. "He's been ideating for 72 hours. Don't go in there unless you want a 2-hour lecture on quantum catalysts." Elena, the project is on fire, literally. "The prototype is on fire," she corrected. "The project is fine. He's burning my money. He's incompetent. He's a genius." She snapped, finally looking up. Her eyes were red with exhaustion, but they were bright with a fervor he'd never seen before. "And you're a billionaire. You're used to things being done. He's used to things being right. You're trying to ship a product. He's trying to build a miracle. The miracle is 3 months late and 40 million over budget. And it's 500% better than the original design." She threw the soldering iron down and dragged him to a whiteboard covered in equations. "This," she pointed, "is the original patent. It was good. It was 30% efficient. This," she pointed to a new terrifyingly complex diagram, "is what he's been doing. This is the H1 Omega. It's 95% efficient. It doesn't just power a house, it powers a city. The fire wasn't a failure. It was a test. He was trying to find the absolute breaking point. He found it. That is what the 40 million bought Arthur. It bought the answer. Arthur stared at the board. He didn't understand the science, but he understood the look in her eyes. It was the same look he got before a hostile takeover. It was the look of absolute predatory certainty. "I've been here for 3 weeks," she said, her voice dropping. "Sleeping on that cot. Aris is a nightmare. He's impossible. And he is the most brilliant man I have ever met. You hired me to find value, Arthur. This is what it looks like. It's messy. It's expensive. And it's going to change the world. Now are you going to stand there and yell about your money? Or are you going to get me a fresh pot of coffee and find me a new thermal regulator? Because this one she held up a melted piece of metal is shot. Arthur Montgomery, the man who had humbled boards and broken rivals, stood in the messy lab. He looked at the equations, he looked at the melted metal, and he looked at her. He had come to play the king, but she was the one on the front lines. He nodded slowly. "Coffee," he said, "and a thermal regulator. What does one of those look like? Like a 12-volt battery, but smarter," she said, turning back to the board. "And Arthur, tell your ops guy to stand down. I'm Aris's new CEO. You?" he said, stunned. "You can't be a partner at MCP and the CEO of Helios." "I'm not the CEO, you idiot," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm the translator. I'm the one who stands between the genius and the money. Now go. We're losing the light." Arthur, for the second time in his life, did exactly as she said. 1 year to the day after their meeting at Aurelia, Elena and Arthur stood in the front row of a packed auditorium at the UN Climate Summit. On stage, Dr. Aris Thorne, in a surprisingly well-fitting suit, stood next to a gleaming shoebox-sized device. And so, Aris said, his voice booming with a newfound confidence. People said it was impossible. My old board, my old investors, they said it was unprofitable. They said, sell the patent Aris. But the Helios Montgomery H1 Omega. It's not a patent, it's a promise. He flipped a switch. The entire auditorium, the lights, the giant screens, the speakers went dark. A collective gasp. Then a single blue light glowed from the H1 cell. A second later, the entire auditorium blazed back to life. The applause was deafening. "We are not powering the summit." Aris grinned. "We are powering the grid. As of this morning, the H1 is online, and it is giving power back to the city. Thank you." Backstage, it was chaos. Aris was mobbed by prime ministers and environmentalists. Arthur and Elena found a quiet corner overlooking the East River. "A good day's work," Arthur said, handing her a glass of champagne. "It's a good start," Elena said, taking it. "The Q3 manufacturing rollout will be the real test. We need to watch the supply chain from Brazil." Arthur laughed. Always the analyst. Never ever just take the win. That's my job, Arthur. You take the win. I make sure it's real." His phone buzzed. It was a news alert. He showed it to her. Martin Wexler sentenced 12 years in federal prison for fraud racketeering. Elena looked at the screen for a long, long time. Arthur watched her. He expected a smile, a tear, a look of triumph. She just nodded. "He'll be out in 8 for good behavior," she said, her voice purely analytical. "He'll trade his European contacts for a lighter sentence. He'll be irrelevant in 2. His name is already off the building." Arthur smiled. She wasn't just his partner, she was his equal. "You're terrifying. You know that," he said. "I had a good teacher," she said, raising her glass to him. He clinked his glass against hers. "So," he said, the familiar teasing light in his eyes, "I'm thinking of making a very large purchase. A solar company in Germany. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. Their tech is a mess. Should I do it?" Elena looked at him. The old arrogance was gone. It had been replaced by a genuine shared curiosity. The joke had become their ritual. She didn't smile. She didn't roll her eyes. She just took a sip of her champagne. "Show me the data," she said. "And this time, Arthur, we are picking the restaurant." "Deal." "And we're not going to Aurelia," she added. "There's a little walk up in Queens. They make the best swaki in the city. You'll hate it." A genuine, startling laugh burst from Arthur Montgomery. "Elena," he said, "lead the way. I'll buy the company. You buy dinner." "Deal," she said. The waitress hadn't just given the billionaire advice. She had forged him into a new kind of king, and she hadn't just saved his empire. She had built her own right next to it. And just like that, a cruel joke turned into a billion-dollar partnership. Elena Sanchez proved that your current position doesn't define your potential. She had the knowledge, she had the integrity, and all she needed was one chance, even one born from arrogance, to show the world what she was made of. Arthur Montgomery learned the most valuable lesson in business. True value isn't in the assets you can strip, but in the people you're smart enough to listen to. The most valuable investment he ever made wasn't a company. It was his trust in her. What did you think of Elena's comeback? Was Arthur right to pivot, or should he have just walked away? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of revenge and redemption, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more stories where the overlooked become the unforgettable. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next